on Straight Talk Africa, some call it the fourth estate. The press, the media. It is an essential and vital to a free and thriving democracy as the three branches of government, an independent judiciary, an independent legislature, and the executive. The role of each is to provide checks and balances for the business of governing a nation. Today, we'll discuss the threats to freedom of expression on the continent. Coming up next, right here on Straight Talk Africa. Hello, welcome to Straight Talk Africa. It's Wednesday, August 14th. I am Shaka Sali.
And hello to you, Shaka, and hello to all our viewers and listeners on the African continent and elsewhere. I'm Mariama Diallo, your social media reporter.
Today, we'll discuss the challenges of press freedom in Africa.
And coming up later in our social media segment, you, our audience, have responded to our topic through your emails and Facebook comments. We'll reveal some of them ahead on Straight Talk Africa.
The Ugandan Public Order Management Bill was approved by Parliament, dominated by President Yoweri Museveni's National Resistance Movement. This, despite robust protests from opposition parties. Amnesty International says it's part of a pattern of repression against the political opposition and the press in Uganda. My colleague Paul Sisko has more.
President Museveni's supporters and the Ugandan police say the bill is a practical measure allowing regulation of protests, preventing them from turning violent and disrupting society. The bill gives authorities the power to veto gatherings of 3 or more people discussing political issues in a public place, and break up similar meetings in one's own home. It also permits the use of firearms in self-defense against those resisting arrest. Critics say the bill is aimed at silencing dissent. Authorities say it was passed to protect the public's interests. Uganda is ranked 104th of 179 countries in the 2013 Reporters Without Borders Press Freedom Index. Freelance journalist American Taylor Krause was recently arrested, jailed, fined, and deported for filming police as they dispersed an opposition rally.
I'm the chief of the Horn of Africa service, which broadcasts to Ethiopia and Eritrea, 2 countries where press freedom is restricted, more or less severely. In Eritrea, all media is state media, and anyone who runs afoul of that, of the restrictions imposed by the state, even those who broadcast for state media, are liable to severe penalties.
Eritrea is the most restricted press freedom environment in the world, at 179th, last on the Press Freedom Index for the 6th year in a row. Somalia is ranked 175th of the 179 countries on the index.
It's not government policy in Somalia, but it's the law of the gun that rules there, so journalists live in fear. In Somalia, the government's policy toward journalists is one of, rather enlightened policy. There is nominally a free press, but more Somali journalists have been killed in the past year and a half than in almost any other country, and I think in any other country in Africa, because the Al-Shabaab militant, Islamist militant group will assassinate them. Anyone who broadcasts anti-Al-Shabaab material is a target.
Journalists in and around Nigeria face government restrictions and Boko Haram extremists.
So they go after journalists and kill them.
Leo Kean is with VOA's Hausa service.
We have about 40 journalists, stringers, spread across Nigeria, Niger, Chad, and Ghana. And all of them have received direct threats.
More than 30 journalists have been killed by extremists in Nigeria this year.
These people are speaking the same language that the vast majority of the people in the area also speak. You can't identify them because they don't have uniforms, You cannot, because they're embedded in the civil society, they're also covered by religion. You can't differentiate between an extremist and a regular Muslim because they worship in the same place. When they get out for operations to kill or to bomb, you do not know their intentions. So it makes journalism a bit difficult.
Freedom House, an independent watchdog organization dedicated to the expansion of freedom around the world, says globally there is an overall decline in media freedom. While the trend is positive in Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia, Malawi, Mauritania, Senegal, and even Zimbabwe, 14% of the world's population, less than 1 in 6, lives in countries where political coverage is robust. Government intrusion in media affairs is minimal, and the safety of journalists is guaranteed. Paul Cisco, VOA News.
Thanks, Paul, for that report. Now, joining us here in our Washington studios are two distinguished guests. Taylor Krause, an independent journalist and filmmaker, who also serves as the executive director of Voices of Rwanda, a non-profit organization dedicated to recording and preserving testimonies of Rwandans and to ensuring that their stories inform the world. Tesfamicael Gerahtu, the Eritrean ambassador to the United Kingdom and Ireland. Well, I have to say, frankly, that the two of you, you're most welcome to Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you.
And especially given that, in fact, the two of you, it is the first time we are hosting you right here in Washington, D.C.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. Now, joining us from New York is Muhammad Keita, Advocacy Coordinator for Africa Program for the Committee to Protect Journalists, who joins us, of course, from our studios in New York City. Well, thank you so much, Muhammad, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure because the last time we had you, I think you were with us for a very few minutes, really.
Indeed.
Well, you're most welcome again. And last but not least, Ofono Opondo, the government of Uganda, the government of Uganda spokesperson and executive director of the Uganda Media Center. He joins us on the telephone link-up from the Ugandan capital, Kampala. Thank you so much, Mr. Ofono Opondo, for joining us from Kampala.
Most welcome, Mr. Shaka Sadi.
The pleasure is mine. The pleasure is mine. Later in the program, we'll give you, the audience, a chance to call and talk with our guests. The number to call is 202-619-3111. The US country code is 1. But before we begin today's discussion, here is VOA's Horn of Africa chief, Peter Henlin, who tells us about a VOA stringer, Akiliru Solomon, who he says was imprisoned for 18 months for reporting on what, of course, he calls the truth. I'm afraid we do have some temporary technical difficulties, but in the meantime, I could come to you, Ambassador Gerahtu. How are you?
Fine, thank you, Sheikh.
What are you doing in America? You are your country's ambassador to the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland.
As you might well know, that there is a very strong Eritrean community organized in the diaspora everywhere. And as part of trying to strengthen and consolidate their community social fabrics, Eritrean cultural festivals have been going on since the liberation struggle. And that has become an important process and tool for trying to raise their mobilization, organization in their capacity, and be integrated in as much as possible and contribute to the society they are in. And at the same time also be part of the overall national development agenda in Eritrea. So I just came to participate in the Eritrean Cultural Festival in Washington, D.C. and Seattle, which went very well and successful.
Did you meet some opposition voices? Because there are so many Eritreans in this town. If you mention Isaias Afwerki, they might want to take you somewhere to a prison like Alcatraz in California.
I don't know whether you would call them opposition, because there is always an opposition voice everywhere, in every society, in every corner. but that doesn't have to be at the expense of the national unity, the national interest, and they were all viable feature in development of a society.
I see.
So I would never call them opposition, and many of them have been working with countries which have belligerent stance on Eritrea, like Ethiopia and some other countries. So this would never be taken as an opposition. It's rather a renegade structure which is undermining the national development agenda of a new country which came out of a result of a long history of war, completely destabilized by the overall colonial policies, which completely distracted the base of the country.
We'll get to that later. Let's go to the other piece I mentioned a little bit earlier. It's now ready. VOA's Horn of Africa chief, Peter Heinlein, who tells us about a VOA stringer, Akliru Solomon, who he says was imprisoned for 18 months for reporting the truth.
Some years ago, a VOA had a stringer in Asmara. This was during the war between Ethiopia and Eritrea. And our stringer reported that at a ceremony for the families of fallen war heroes, many of the family members were in tears, crying and mourning the losses of their sons and fathers and brothers. And the state media reported that they received accolades and medals on behalf of their loved ones with smiles on their faces and comments of pride for the bravery of their lost relatives. Well, the stringer's report was broadcast on VOA saying that the family members were crying. The state didn't like this contradiction of their version of it, and incarcerated our stringer, left him in a shipping container for 18 months before he was able to get out and escape to Ethiopia, where he remained a refugee for years before we finally were able to get him granted asylum in Canada, where he now lives.
Well, I am sure that you heard it, Mr. Ambassador. Your immediate reaction to that piece?
I take it as a fabrication in life. There are 3 points that could be mentioned here. One is it contradicts the element of humanity. Anybody decides or becoming a martyr for his or her country, definitely you will have the internal feeling which is part of our humanity. But unless you wanted to make it sensational, the important thing is that we have been undergoing in a bitter struggle for 30 years. And during the border war also, we had to pay huge human sacrifices. Well, definitely there is that element of humanity, but everybody in Eritrea feels and believes that to become a martyr for the sake of a viable future of the country is one of the important responsibilities that every Eritrean shoulders. So in the event that has been mentioned here, definitely people felt something humanly, but at the same time, it was something of an obligation that every Eritrean shouldered, and that's why many again paid their life as martyrs for the country.
So you
and there
don't,
was jubilation.
You don't have a problem, frankly, accepting the fact that Akliru Solomon was in fact imprisoned by your government for telling the truth, no matter how he told it?
It's not true, and it's not because of that reporting that he could be arrested. I think the question is, we are living in a real world. Even in this country, if there are people who try to report, you talk about free press, if there are people who try to report in a way that completely jeopardizes the national interest, the national security of the country.
That is correct.
The freedom, the right goes always with obligations. If you surpass that obligation, then definitely there will be repercussions, because even the press laws in every country clearly stipulate this, and then the press law in Eritrea also stipulates this. So there is an obligation that you have to shoulder.
Is that why, for example, back in Eritrea, when someone criticized government policies and what have you, he is considered to be in court violation of national security interests?
Trying to express your ideas, your views in Eritrea doesn't take you neither to the jail nor even to any other form of accountability.
Where does it take you?
You're free. You are free to say your own mind. The question is, when you start to surpass that red line, which undermines the national security of the country, which tries to sow discord and destabilize the social fabrics of the society, when it runs against the national unity of the country, these are all dimensions which we paid huge sacrifices in the 30 years of national liberation war. You do something against all this, then definitely you will be accountable.
We'll come to that. Before we pause for a short break, we would like to remind you that Straight Talk Africa is on the social networking website Facebook. Just enter the keyword Straight Talk Africa. Become a fan and join the conversation with other friends of the Voice of America. We'll be right back with you, so please don't go away.
While the sub-Saharan region saw several significant gains, especially in West Africa, civil conflicts and the emergence of violent Islamist groups prevented an overall upgrade for political freedom. 3 countries moved from partly free to free. Those countries are Lesotho, Sierra Leone, and Senegal. Côte d'Ivoire moved from not free to partly free. Finally, Guinea and Malawi also showed some gains.
The lyrics could be French,
English,
Portuguese,
Bantu,
Arabic.
It is the beat.
The African beat that counts.
The beat does all the translations.
It cuts across all languages and gives us the understanding that this is the African beat.
It is so distinct
and adhesive.
It binds us together.
African beat on the Voice of America. For more information, visit our website at www.voanews.com/AfricanBeat.
This is Straight Talk Africa on the Voice of America. What is your opinion about today's topic? Call us at 202-619-3111. U.S. country code 1. When you call, remember the following. Ask only one question. Keep your comment brief and turn down the volume on your radio or television. Now let's return to Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you very much, Esther Gizui. Are you there, Muhammad? Muhammad, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Great.
You heard the Eritrean ambassador's argument, at least in terms of justifying why some of the Eritrean journalists who operate on the ground run into trouble. In fact, he says, on the contrary, there is, at least from what I heard from him, frankly, there is full, if you will, press freedom. Why do you rank them at the bottom of the whole world then? What kind of empirical evidence do you have on them?
Well, we know that governments as diverse as the government of Eritrea, the government of Iran, Turkey, or even the U.S. government have invoked national security grounds to jail journalists and restrict information. You know, that is a given that will continue to be the case. Now, there are international norms that govern restrictions on freedoms. You know, there are norms of proportionality. You know, these restrictions must be clear and proportional to the threat, and the threats must be clear. And in the case of Eritrea, we have heard the officials invoke these very vague threats to national security. We have heard them change the story multiple times when pressed about details about what these threats are. We have heard them invoke very vague anti-state plots. We have heard them accuse journalists of skirting the national service. You know, we've heard all kinds of accusations, but at the end of the day, the accusations have remained vague and unsubstantiated. And if the government of Eritrea is confident and has, in fact, evidence and proof that the journalists, or anyone for that matter, is threatening national security, is conspiring against the state, how come they have never ever shown the world any evidence at all about all this? And the accused have never had a chance to defend themselves. They have never been given a day in court. None of them have ever been formally charged with a crime. They are held in indefinite detention without access to their family, their lawyers. It's a gulag in Eritrea. And those that have managed to escape the country are the ones that are able to tell bits and bits of details about what is happening in the country. But you know, the Eritrean government has a very strong propaganda infrastructure, and they're projecting the image of a self-reliant nation that is, you know, defying odds and achieving development, and all is well. And they're vilifying the United States, they're vilifying Ethiopia while cozying up to other countries. And it's very much an environment where, you know, the government has not been consistent. You know, it's unfortunate that it happens to be the only country in Africa where the Constitution has been suspended since 2001. A Constitution which is that basic document, you know, that establishes a trust between the governed and the government and those governing the party, so that there is no constitution, there is no functioning legal system, and all we hear is the voice of the ruling party, which does not reflect the natural diversity of opinions of Eritreans in the country and outside the country. Now, we understand that the Eritrean government has a legitimate grievance when it comes to the border dispute with Ethiopia, and the fact that the Ethiopian government has not respected the international ruling on the border. But using that as an excuse to basically maintain this perpetual state of you know, war and conscription.
Thank you, Muhammad.
It's not right.
Thank you, Muhammad. Those are definitely very, very serious charges. What about the fact that, yes, you did have a constitution ratified back, I suppose, in 1997 or something of that sort, but has never been fully implemented? How do you describe the people of your country? Are they subjects or are they citizens?
I think one of the greatest misconceptions, and which leads to wrong perceptions about Eritrea and the Eritrean national constitution, is that, as they say, it's not implemented. Actually, we are following the constitution. So there is a constitution in Eritrea. It's implemented. Maybe several parts of it have not been implemented, especially one part.
In fact, some people have characterized what you are describing as a constitution as a party manifesto.
No.
A party manifesto, certainly not a constitution that gives its people constitutional rights.
No. There is no party in Eritrea in the first place. That's another misconception. The organization, the political organization in Eritrea, is a continuation of the national liberation struggle, and as a way of trying to trigger the political process of nation building. The organization has been continuing its responsibility and its effort to develop a viable situation in Eritrea until we reach a certain level of political landscape in the country. So, number one, it's not a party.
Is that the reason why you have never had elections, for example?
Number two, I'll come to that. Number two, yes, the political organization has its own manifesto, but there is clearly a national constitution which is implemented. The part that has not been implemented is the national election, and that has to do with the war and the aftermath of the war. Muhammad was talking about the border dispute. There is no border dispute now between Eritrea and Ethiopia. It has been resolved, and the issue now is Ethiopia, in defiance of the international ruling, in defiance of the international law, continues to occupy sovereign Eritrean territories. And this is, he was talking about using that as an excuse. But this is, in fact, is a declaration of war in Eritrea. Occupation is occupation and is a declaration of war.
Any
so
particular
these
reason,
are misconceptions.
Given your portrayal, frankly, of Eritrea, it would seem to me that almost everything seems to be doing fine. As a matter of fact, you are doing well in the area of achieving, for example, UN Millennium Development Goals. You have achieved so far about 6 out of 8, which is a good thing. But why, given what you have achieved, for example, why don't you allow other voices to be heard? You don't allow, for example, non-government media, correct?
Well, I'll elaborate on that.
The problem, time is not our best ally, because really this is a show we are going to be talking about other countries and what have you. So try to be as brief as you can.
Okay. The first point is that the voices of the people are heard in Eritrea. Of course, we need to take into consideration the reality, and in particular the context of the country, how we came and where we are now. So we do not have the private media, as it is called, but there is a great deal of media freedom and communication in the country, which is working as a way of trying to reflect the truth and raise the responsible participation of the people and as an instrument of national development. So that's one thing. The second thing is that the reason why we haven't allowed the private media or this time is, as a small and young country, we tried it at an early situation, but that was used externally for other political motives to destabilize the country. So the experience that we have got is, yes, we know that at a certain level of political development of the country, there could be many ways, diverse ways of trying to entertain ideas and communication information. But at this time, taking into consideration the situation of the country, where there is an environment of hostility, including occupation, and on top of that, the institutional, human, material, organizational capacity of the country, these are the parameters that need to be considered in terms of future development.
I see.
But the influence of the media in the country, the participation of the people in media and communication processes is very high. And you could follow the Eritrean media, the Eritrean television, where people openly come in the discussion and criticize the government, they criticize the ministries openly. And you could ask people to translate this for you.
Yes, I can hear you.
So if that is the case, then frankly, it seems to me that you should be confident enough to allow these other alternative voices to come through independent channels, independent of the government, just like most countries, frankly, on the continent and around the world. In any case, time is not our best ally. You are tuned into Straight Talk Africa. We'll have more in our discussion in a moment. But first, here is Mariama Diallo. Take it away, Mariama.
Well, thanks, Shaka. Still to come, we'll reveal some of the outstanding feedback we've received through social media. But now, here is one of the responses to our question of the week. Judge Emmett from Mulungushi University in Kabwe, Zambia writes, "The media is probably the most powerful mouthpiece that a society at large relies on to be updated on current affairs. So what is the justification for a transparent governing body to hinder the process of transparency by limiting or manipulating media institutions?" he asked.
Like Voice of America on Facebook. Follow VOA on Twitter. Join VOA on our YouTube channel. Like, follow, join VOA.
This is Straight Talk Africa on the Voice of America. Call us now with your questions and comments. The number 202-619-3111 and the U.S. country code is 1. Call us collect and we'll pay for the call, or call direct and we'll call you right back. Remember to keep your questions brief. Now back to Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you very much, Esther Gizuya, and welcome back to Straight Talk Africa, live from Washington. Once again, it's time to bring in my colleague and social media reporter, Mariama Diaro. Take it away again, Mariama.
Well, thanks, Shaka. Despite being home to several of the world's worst performing countries in terms of respect for human rights, Africa saw uneven progress toward democratization during the 1990s and the early 2000s, with many developing nations on the continent struggling for democracy, not supporting freedom of the press. For instance, while elections are being held in the Gambia and Ethiopia, the media in these countries is often restricted or controlled by the government in a form of censorship. In fact, some analysts say press freedom does not guarantee honest elections, but it helps those in power to justify the event. This brings us to our question of the week, which asks, is it possible to have good governance and democracy without an independent and free media? Well, we'll go right to your answers and begin with Solomon Ricky King, who wrote to us from Katanga in the Democratic Republic of Congo. He says, democracy means no government interruption in people's views about it. Therefore, there must be an independent media in order to have democracy and good governance. Another comment comes from Paul Nganga in Kenya, who posted his opinion on our wall saying, media freedom should be ensured, but there is nothing like absolute freedom. Checks and balances must be there. Shaka, right on the point from Paul, because many times people forget that checks and balances are indeed the basis for any good journalist. But what about the part that there is no such thing as absolute freedom?
Well, absolute freedom indeed, there is no such a thing. It is merely an ideal, but freedom has to be relative. What about you, Taylor? Is it necessary, is it a prerequisite that in order for you to be a free society, a democratic society, you must have a free media?
Thanks so much, Shaka, for having me here today. As I was driving past the Jefferson Memorial just to get here to the studios here in Washington, I was reminded of one of the quotes from Jefferson, who says, if he had to choose between government and newspaper, or newspaper and government, he would prefer the latter, provided that the population could read the newspaper.
I remember that.
And he continues on later to talk about how where there is a thriving press, no society would be unsafe. So I think absolutely that the press provides a check on government, and it's absolutely necessary. And when you have destabilized democracy, you have a destabilized government as well, and a destabilized state. And in failed state situations, we know where that leads.
What about you, my brother Ofono Opondo? How do you react to that?
Well, obviously we need a free media in order to have good and vibrant democracy, but that free media ought to work within the rules of the country where they work. And the rules obviously have to be fair. The rules have to be enacted in a transparent way. Now, I think the media operates in the public space. If you operate in the public space, you are just like Parliament, you are like the executive, you are like the judiciary. So you ought to work within the rules that are fair, that have been enacted by a democratic platform like the Parliament of many countries around the world.
I see.
Unfortunately, in my view, many people who are journalists, who are in the media, tend to think that they should be excluded from abiding by the rules.
Does that also perhaps mean that a government is free to use the law to undermine democracy, to undermine justice?
No. The government should not use the law to undermine democracy in any case. There are always appeal mechanisms if the government oversteps its boundaries. You can go to courts of law, at the very extreme end, when election time comes, you can change a bad government.
We'll come to you later when we talk, of course, about the bill, the important bill that has just passed in your parliament, which is the Public Order Management Bill. Mariama, what else are people saying about today's topic?
Well, Shaka, a lot. Too bad we only have time for a few comments, and we'll take a look at Charles Walker Dollar, a student at Nkumba University in Uganda, what he has to say, saying that governments that put restrictions on the media are the bad and despotic ones. The question to be asked should be, why would they, in this case the governments, put restrictions on the media if their governance is good? They do this to conceal their bad governance from the rest of the world. I have to add that we've also gotten a lot of reactions from Uganda about the new bill, Shaka, that you just mentioned, the new bill that just passed, that could probably take up a whole show by itself. But finally, we're going to look at another comment from Yebe Diallo from Port Kamsar in the Bokeh region in Guinea, who writes, "In my view, democracy goes with freedom of speech. Therefore, it is impossible to have democracy and good governance without an independent and free media." Shaka, two comments from Uganda and Guinea. Both are adamant at the fact that there must be an independent media. It's almost a prerequisite for any country that wants to call itself democratic.
Mohammed, what about that? You must have been following. Is there such a thing, in fact, as an independent media?
I cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Were you hearing me? Well, I'm afraid that Mohammed cannot hear me right now. Let me come to you, Mr. Ambassador. You just had it. If in fact you are free, you are hardworking, and everybody, lives happily and thereafter, then why have these, someone might call them draconian restrictions on the operation of the media and the journalists? Why don't you look at journalists like us as your allies, as opposed to looking at us as your enemies, really?
Eritrea doesn't look journalists as enemies because we firmly believe that as a country that emanated from the struggle for human rights during the 30 years of national liberation struggle, in the nation building process, we believe that responsible media is very important for the country. People have been mentioning about its relationship with democracy. If there is to be responsible media, I think it should be related to essentially most important democracy element, which is there must be responsible participation of the people. Now in Eritrea there is responsible participation of the people, and that's the biggest political asset that we have.
So you are talking about what countries like yours would say service delivery?
No.
Over freedoms?
No.
Yeah, because my question would have frankly been whether you think that service delivery, providing services to people, which is a good thing, and you are making some progress in some areas, in terms of, for example, reduction of poverty, mortality, reducing child mortality rates, and all sorts of things. Agriculture, I have not had famine in your country, which is a good thing. But do you really think that service delivery and freedom of expression, for example, of freedoms are mutually exclusive, or are they mutually reinforcing, really?
I think the fallacy lies there. You can never have people participating, building their own future responsibly without expressing their idea, showing creativity, disseminating their own information. So this is the fallacy that exists in all the quarters that want to target Eritrea.
Welcome to that time is not a manifesto lie. There's no democracy, by the way, in this studio. When a producer says go, you have to go without asking questions. Thanks, Mariama, for bringing us this week's audience reaction.
I always like the part when you say that there is no democracy in this studio. I love that. Well, thanks, Shaka, and thanks all our viewers and listeners for taking the time to write to us and make their voices heard. We love hearing from you. So drop us a line at africatv@voanews.com. Once again, our email address is africatv@voanews.com. or post your comment on our Facebook page. Just enter the keywords Straight Talk Africa. Be sure to visit us online at voaafrica.com, or you can join our YouTube channel. Then just subscribe to VOA TV to Africa. Now let's take a look at what's on tap for next week's program. Next week on Straight Talk Africa, U.S. and African leaders met in the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa this week to discuss the African Growth and Opportunity Act, also known as AGOA, which expires in 2 years. We'll discuss the pros, cons, and the future of the act next week, right here on Straight Talk Africa.
Well, we do have, of course, a caller, and this is, of course, a guy from New York, I think. Is it Telda from New York?
Yes, Shaka. Good afternoon, Shaka.
I am hugely terrific. What is your question? You have to be very brief. You have 1 minute, my brother.
For the Eritrean ambassador, I have a very simple question. He talks about responsible media. Let me be honest with him and ask him one very good question. Had it been a free media, I would have asked it in Eritrea there. There is one Ethiopian colonel, Colonel Taddese Mulune, who has disappeared in Eritrea 2 years ago. Can he tell me exactly? The families are crying, his daughters are crying. What happened to him? If he is dead, let the family know. Why is the secret of a man, a responsible person can tell you if a man is dead, he is dead?
You ask the question. He has the answer.
Well, I don't have any information about this, and but I'll take that into note.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's go to Makonnen from Washington, D.C. Hello, Makonnen.
Hello. Thank you, Shaka. I'll get straight to my point. My focus is mainly on the data that exists. When we talk about free media, first of all, I'm an Eritrean who visits Eritrea frequently and has family in Eritrea. There are no restrictions on foreign media via satellite dishes and internet. This is access to information, unrestricted access to information, no matter where it's being prepared from. Secondly, we as Eritreans living in diaspora or Eritreans in Eritrea have continuous access to our government officials, our representatives, and we do voice our concerns. So there's a fallacy when we talk about like there is no freedom of speech in Eritrea.
Now, Makonnen, how can you talk about satellite, transmissions and stuff like that when it is a very well-known fact that when a country like Eritrea comes up, really, it is one of those that uses technology to control rather to empower its own people?
Okay, I have visited Eritrea several times, and there are satellite dishes throughout the country watching whatever news channels that you're talking about that you can watch out here.
What about internet brokerages and stuff like that?
Repeat that again.
The internet.
And internet too. There are no restrictions to any websites. The so-called opposition websites that we have access to here, Eritreans, we can access them from Eritrea as well.
You must be one of the few people that. You must be one of the few people, frankly, that I've heard say that. But in any case, thank you so much for. Thank you so much for your contribution, Makonnen. Let's go to actually to Ofono Pondo. My brother Pondo, are you there?
Yes, I'm listening to you.
Loud and clear.
Yes, please.
You just passed a very draconian, really, bill, and that is the Public Order Management Bill. What do you think about this bill, honestly? Because there are people who are saying that it virtually transforms the Republic of Uganda into a prison, into Ruzira, that people don't have to worry, in fact, going to prison.
Well, I would want to know what the specifically people are disputing about the bill. The reason it is called the bill.
Could you please, Ofono, could you please reduce the volume on your television set because we are getting an echo on the line?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
I am saying.
Go ahead, please.
I would want to know what specifically the dispute about the Public Order Management Bill is about. This bill was first introduced in Parliament in 2009. It elapsed with the old Parliament. It was reintroduced in 2011. It has been in the Committee of Parliament for Legal and Parliamentary Affairs. It came out of that committee without a minority report. And so I think many people who are criticizing the bill are criticizing on the basis of the very original draft that was presented.
Now, Ofono, the last time I checked, frankly, what you are referring to is, I think, a bill that was, I think, nullified by the Constitutional Court, the Ugandan Constitutional Court, correct?
Well, this bill has never been struck by the Constitutional Court. There are false allegations that Parliament has reenacted a provision that was struck by the Constitutional Court. As I was saying, the critics of the bill are basing on the original draft that was presented. I can tell you, Mr. Shakastari, that the bill that was passed last week has gone perhaps 85% transformation, completely a new thing. So I think it would be better for people to wait for the certified copy from the Hansard, from the clerks of Parliament, before they make the criticism. But I think that we in Uganda, and like in many parts of Africa, we simply have bad losers who would wish to spread ignorance, and they take advantage of general lack of information to spread lies.
I see.
There is no way the government of Uganda can reenact what the Constitutional Court has struck down.
Taylor, would you like to react to that,
will
please?
set us free.
Sure.
Yeah.
What this bill effectively does is criminalizes assembly of 3 or more people in the public and gives free rein to the Ugandan police to imprison people if they feel like it, or to even open fire.
What does the public mean in this particular context?
The public could mean potentially members of the opposition.
It could mean having a drink, like the local
They could be having a drink. They could also, it could be members of...
Shaka, again,
just hold on, please.
That's where the lie is.
Just
the gentleman speaking in the studio doesn't know.
Just hold on, please. You have your time.
Has got nothing to do with 3 people as...
Just hold on. You have your time, please. Go ahead, please. Go ahead, Taylor.
Sure. I can share what I witnessed over the last few weeks when I was in Uganda.
What did you witness?
One of the things I witnessed, and I can even begin at the beginning of the day, but what I witnessed during the incident where the police were beating the population and shooting tear gas into the population effectively to eliminate any form of public assembly, or even perhaps to scare the public into the future when they say, effectively saying, do not gather. We're going to put down any sort of assembly. What I witnessed was that brutality and violence.
And this was before the bill was passed by Parliament, by the way.
In fact, it was a week before the bill. And then the bill came a week following that, which effectively gives permission to the police to do whatever they want. And this wasn't even an opposition rally. They're calling it the opposition rally in the newspapers in Uganda. But what this was an individual driving down the street after his court case.
Who was that individual?
This individual was Dr. Kiza Besigye. And he was driving down the street after being acquitted of...
A man who has been a presidential candidate 3 times.
A man has been a presidential candidate 3 times, who has undergone countless imprisonments.
A man who was a physician of rebel leader Yoweri Museveni in the bush.
Absolutely. He was driving down the street. He was acquitted of the former charge of incitement to violence in the court system. He was acquitted, and he was driving down the street and decided to go downtown. Of course, everywhere he moves, his car is flanked by riot police.
Why were you there? Why were you with him?
I decided to go to Uganda, and I've been working in Uganda for many years. On this particular trip, I decided to go and search for a potential story that I could pitch to media outlets in this country, because working in the Great Lakes region, it's become ostensibly another home to me, and I care about the region and the stability of the region. And I realized that I wanted to work on a story in Uganda, and decided to go and film and find the right story so I could come home and pitch it to different outlets and say, this is what I'm witnessing in Uganda, and I think things are changing, and perhaps we should take notice of this internationally.
But the government says, Taylor, you did not have permission. You were not allowed to work in Uganda as a journalist.
And I asked the government, I asked members of the police, I said, is it illegal to press record on my cell phone or to press record on a camera? If perhaps you are sending media at the moment, if you're acting as a journalist and sending reports out to the Associated Press or to Reuters, then you're acting and being paid as a journalist. I was going to collect information, to come back home, to pitch a story that I would then be sent back to Uganda on assignment and go through the proper procedure to find a journalist permit, if that's what was required, and to be able to operate.
So what happened to you?
Unfortunately, I think that they're using this law to effectively do what they want, of course, even with international journalists. What happened to me was after the tear gas incident, I was taken in by the police, questioned for nearly 10 hours.
Which specific police station was that?
The Central Police Station. I was taken to the top of the Central Police Station and questioned...
In Kampala?
In Kampala. Questioned for 9 hours, and then eventually, after I said, so am I being imprisoned, or I continue to be detained and you're not letting me free?
For how long?
After 9.5 hours, they then decided they sent another car of police and shipped me off, drove me down the street with sirens blaring to Jinja Road Police Station, at which point I was put in the cell.
With the cell in his...
And then what happened after that began to reveal what was happening in Uganda to me. And what I witnessed was that immigration, the police handed this case to immigration and said, okay, this is a violation of a tourist visa. Immigration said, okay, let's let him go. We'll send him back to the US. That's fine. And I wasn't even charged with a crime. And if I were charged with a crime, I'd be able to answer to that crime in a court of law.
And you were there for 4 days?
But instead, the police decided to keep me there for 4 days, every single day, interrogating me.
In Jinja?
In Jinja Police Station.
Jinja itself? 50 miles away, outside of Kampala?
No, this is in Jinja Road Police Station,
Road,
in Kampala.
I understand, yeah.
And so the police came every single day and took me out for more interrogation for 4 days, even after immigration said, let's release him.
Did you find there other Ugandan inmates?
Absolutely, I found many Ugandan inmates.
So what story did they share with you?
There are many different stories. I found an Ethiopian, I found a Somalian, I found a Liberian,
Were they also journalists?
Nobody was a journalist per se, but there were 2 Indians in there who were arrested on immigration charges as well. And their immigration charges, in fact, one individual from Gulu, who had been living in the country for many years, had his permits and his papers at his home. But the police decided to take him from Gulu down to Kampala, and by the time his wife showed up in Kampala with his papers, his deportation had already been set. So he spent 4 months in prison over immigration charges. And what happened with my case is that immigration said, we'll let him go, but the police decided extra legally, without even charging me, to keep me in prison for 4 days, and then to go and confiscate all of my equipment and computers and to erase everything.
Share with us some of the things that they asked you during the interrogation. It seems to me some of them are interesting.
You know, what I found interesting was that they were particularly worried about the details that I was filming during the incident with the tear gas. I was filming close-ups of individuals, close-ups of hands that were shooting out tear gas to the population. And I was later told by other Ugandan journalists after I returned back to the United States that some people were particularly concerned that this material might be used in The Hague against potentially a future case
the ICC.
In the ICC against Museveni, and potentially even individuals who had been enacting brutality against a population that had not actually engaged in anything.
This may seem self-serving, but what about reports I had that you were asked whether you knew a certain Shaka Sali?
Absolutely.
Or whether you were working for him?
Absolutely.
Is that true?
There was a moment when I was sitting in an interrogation in one room and there was a newspaper there. And there was an article about you and about the Sejusa case. And they said, you must know him. You have a connection to him.
Interesting.
Of course, I had never spoken to you
General
ever.
David Sejusa. That's just an interview that we did with General David Sejusa a couple of weeks ago, as a matter of fact. But otherwise, I'm glad that at least we have been able to meet, because we had never met. Nowhere had we even had a telephone conversation, as a matter of fact.
Right.
Now, let me talk to my brother in Kampala, Ofono.
Yes, please.
Are you there?
I am here.
You've heard, of course, what Taylor is alleging or saying?
Yes, I have heard him.
And you are familiar with the case, aren't you?
I am very familiar with the case. I was involved. Let me first start by saying I am glad Mr. Taylor is out of Uganda safely and back to his home country, United States, the home of the rules, where rules are obeyed. Mr. Taylor entered Uganda as a tourist visa on short notice, 2 weeks, and he decided to begin to work. Under the Ugandan laws, if you are from America, you are from Europe, you are from Asia, you are required to have a work permit. Mr. Taylor did not have this. I am the one in charge of vetting and accrediting foreign journalists into the country. I don't have Mr. Taylor in my database whatsoever.
I see. So
the immigration does not have him as a person who has applied for a work permit.
Why didn't you charge him with a crime then, since you arrested him and you locked him up at least for 4 days, as he says?
Well, he can sue the Ugandan government for wrongful detention. Not every case that we apprehend necessarily goes to court. In our assessment, it was better for us to send him back to his country of origin. As soon as he was apprehended, the American embassy in Uganda, in Kampala, was notified. They got in touch with him, and for the 3-4 days he was under immigration waiting deportation, he had consular services. So that is the choice we took. We did not want to charge him with any criminal offense, although he had committed a criminal offense, to work in Uganda without a work permit.
He seems to be disagreeing with you, Ofono, and the time happens not to be our best ally. Could you please give him just a minute to respond, please?
He is free to disagree with me. I have just said I'm glad he is out of Uganda, back to his home country where he is safe.
Thank you. Thank you. What about that?
Maybe I'll just ask a quick question to Mr. Opondo. Now that I'm in the U.S., if I were to apply for a journalist visa now to return to your country, would you personally grant me that visa?
Interesting.
I will do so. I will gladly do so.
Incredible.
And Mr. Shaka Sali there has my email. You can send me your details. I can guarantee you I will give you accreditation.
Incredible. You're my man, Ofono Opondo. That's the way it should be, really. We should be doing business in a manner that is civil.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In fact,
we should be civil.
The moment.
And I can tell you, if I had got in touch with Mr. Taylor perhaps 2 days before he was apprehended, I think we would have handled his case in a different way.
Now I'm surprised.
We would have perhaps asked him to regularize his stay and to improve what he wanted to do.
Thank you.
What he wanted to do.
It looks like we might have a sort of Hollywood happy ending here.
I'm surprised that you didn't have me in your database, given that I've worked in the region and in Uganda for the last 9 years, and I have had permits in the past.
Unfortunately, time happens not to be our best ally. On that note, thanks to our distinguished guest, Taylor Cross, an independent journalist and filmmaker, who also serves as the executive director of Voices of Rwanda, Tesfamicael Gerahtu, the Eritrean ambassador to the United Kingdom and Ireland. I'm sorry for murdering your name. Mohamed Keita, advocacy coordinator for Africa program at the Committee to Protect Journalists, who joined us from our New York studios. And last but not least, Ofono Opondo, the Ugandan government spokesperson. He joined us on the telephone from the Ugandan capital, Kampala. Thanks to our affiliate stations, along with our viewers and listeners, we thank you for tuning in. If you're listening to us on the Voice of America, Learning English is coming up next, and tomorrow morning it's Daybreak Africa with James Pate. Also, don't forget to tune into Voice of America's Africa 54, 30-minute daily television magazine program that features what's trending in news, health, sports, and lifestyle. On behalf of the Voice of America, thanks for tuning into Straight Talk Africa. In the meantime, get better, not bitter, and please remember to keep the African hopes alive.